Hey, good morning everybody. Welcome to this week's Q&A. I gotta thank Tony for this awesome heavy metal slug shirt. You can't quite see it, but it's two of my favorite things in one, metal and video games. But anyway, let's jump into the Q&As and see what we got this week. Alright, let's start from the bottom up this time. My buddy Chris from Belgium wanted to know which model of CD-ROM writer Voltar advised me to buy, and any device on a DVD writer, as well as CD or DVD brands. So the one that I use that Voltar just happened to be skimming eBay and said, hey, you should buy this. It's a Plextor PX-880U. I have kind of a cold, so I'll leave that in the description if no one understands what I'm saying. But that does DVDs and CDs. I've had amazing luck with it. Everything works fine, and it's the Tayo Yuden discs, both CD and DVD. So I'll leave links to the ones that I bought. I don't know if they're in stock anymore, so hopefully I'll be able to point people in the right direction. But that's the best practice you could do, is using a good quality. Plextor is usually the brand. Older Plextors are usually the ones that people talk about. Using those, burning at the slowest speed that the drive allows. So on this drive, I think the slowest CD speed is 10x or something, and the slowest DVD speed is 2x. So whatever the slowest speed the drive allows should be perfect. And then just use high quality discs, and this should not shorten the lifespan of your laser any more than using a normal CD or game would. Should. Last week we talked about potentially soft modding a PS2 without using a pre-hacked memory card, and Timothy Beerup, Chris Larson, and Highjuice all chimed in and were able to give some suggestions and some files on how to do that. To be honest, it seems like if you know somebody with a modded PS2, just bring your card over there. It's going to probably save you some time. But if you don't know anybody with it, or nobody local, you don't want to mail anything, all of the links were provided on pretty much everything you could possibly use. It just looks a little more complicated than just hacking the memory card did. But there's a lot of links here, so I'm just going to leave a link back to this last week's Q&A page in case anybody's watching it in the future. That way you don't have to go rummaging through. You could just click on the link and get everything there. So yeah, it seems a little complicated, but if you just don't have the ability to get your hands on a hacked memory card, then this certainly is a good way to do it. But I believe, if I remember correctly, the way I did it was I had found a PS2 boot disk that I got right when the PS2 hacking first started. So I was able to boot with that and then use this tool to open the drive without pushing the button, and then put another disk in with Homebrew on it, and was able to do it that way as well. And that's how I got my first one. And then I went to the store, bought a bunch of memory cards, and hacked a bunch just in case something happened to the memory card. But yeah, that kind of brings back a bunch of memories. Both, I remember doing that to my brother's PS2 while he was in college, and he never used the swap trick ever. And then, later on when I started the website, I borrowed that PS2, and it still had because you had to take off the front cover of the DVD drive, it still had that missing, and I still had the tool. So that's how I was able to do the mod, and then I put it all back together, and then I think I refurbished it and sent it back to my brother. But yeah, that's thanks for all the different links and everything. I'll definitely look into that, and I'll try again getting back into PS2 fat hard drive mods, because I mean it's so easy to do, just to drop a game on there, patch it, and test it. But I don't know, I'm still in my mind going back and forth on which is better, having just a PS2 Slim and a whole bunch of really good quality discs, or having a PS1 with a PSIO and a PS2 with a hard drive mod. Tony Mora asked, which is better for the Saturn, the Phoebe or the Rhea? They're exactly the same, they're just designed for different board revisions. And the Phoebe is designed for the 21-pin version, and the Rhea is designed for the 20-pin version. And I think this crosses over between Model 1 and Model 2, so you can't just buy the Model 2 version, you have to pop it off. So in all honesty, if you're going to do any mods to your console, you should really just write down exactly which one you have, just in case there's ever an issue. It'll be very easy to diagnose without taking the whole thing apart again. You could just say, like, I got a Model 1 Genesis VA6 with jail bars or something like that, and it'll be a lot easier for the nerds to help diagnose these things. So it's only a few screws. I'd recommend popping the Saturn open, checking which board revision it is, counting the pins, and then that's how you decide which the Phoebe or the Rhea to purchase. Also, I believe the ISO compatibility isn't 100%. I think you need to do special things to get it to work. Whereas I believe that Satiator, I don't really, whatever. The plug-and-play version, I believe that one, you're able to just dump whatever on there. So just keep that in mind. Don't let that deter you. Just know that there will be some more work involved. But either way, I mean, I just love the fact that there's optical drive emulators for these things now. Especially the Saturn. What just a cool, weird library of games. But anyway, I digress. Open it up, count the pins, check the motherboard revision, and that's how you would determine. Adam W. had a great question that I don't have the answer to, but maybe I could point you in the right direction. He said in the Dreamcast mods video, I covered the power supply mod, that you're supposed to remove the voltage regulator or put a load on it because the GDMU, when you remove the CD-ROM drive, the GDMU does not have a 12-volt rail. So there's no load on that. And as far as everybody I know has been able to test, nothing really uses that except possibly the Dreamcast karaoke machine. So when you don't have a load going on that power supply regulator, it's just left floating and it thinks it needs to be doing work and it ends up overheating. So by adding the resistor to it, it just ties it down and keeps it to a correct heat level, or you just remove it. Now, I haven't done any testing at all on the Saturn for this, and I don't know, I'm assuming that it's probably something similar, but if the power supply is built differently, if something else on the Saturn motherboard uses the 12-volt regulator. So what I would do, if you had the nerdy curiosity, I would buy a cheap thermocouple kit. I think I got mine for $15 or something. Tape thermocouples on the two regulators on the Saturn PSU, use some black tape, and then play a game. And then if you put in and play a game for a while, and, be sensible about it. Don't leave your Saturn next to an air conditioning or a heater, just normal, average gameplay. Play 2 rounds of Daytona or something like that. Then check the heat ratings. Then install either the Phoebe or the Rhea, and then do the same exact test and see what you get. From what I've heard, I didn't do the thermal testing on the GDMUs, my friends did, but from what I heard, it was a huge difference. It wasn't one of those things where on the first test it was, at 50 C, and at the next test it was at 53 C. I mean, it was way noticeable. It was something where you're like, okay, there's definitely an issue here. So that's how you would test it if you wanted to test it yourself. If you want to ask anybody else that's done the testing, Smoke Monsters Discord's probably a good place to do it. Or maybe the Sega 16 forums. I'm not really sure. The only thing I wouldn't do is email the creator directly because he gets grumpy sometimes, which is understandable but strange. I don't know. But yeah, I'm sorry I didn't have an answer for that, and it's a great question. And I don't really know if I want to buy a Rhea for my Saturn. I think I really do just want to wait for the Satiator, whatever. But I might, if I wake up and it's actually available for sale, I might buy one just for the hell of it and then use it as a Patreon giveaway after I get the Satiator or something. I don't know. But I hope I was able to point you in the right direction. And if not, maybe if you're not interested in doing your own tests, maybe you're able to figure out now where to go to ask the question. And please let me know if you figure it out. And I'll do the test myself if I end up getting one. Darkstar7 was again asking about his GameCube setup. And the reason I guess I'm confused about this is just because you have a lot of things in the chain, which is, there's nothing wrong with that at all, by the way. It's just, it's kind of hard to help diagnose and recommend because there could be 4 or 5 correct ways to do this. So the only thing that I would definitely say is that, the Mayflash adapter, if it's currently working for you and you don't have any issues, leave well enough alone. I've just had bad luck with them in the past, but it doesn't mean the model you got is bad. It just means the ones I got is bad. You said spend almost $200 on the component to RGB transcoder you recommended. I had no idea. If you're talking about the Key Digital, I have no idea that those were going so much. They were like $150 new, and then for a long time they dropped down to $30, $40 on eBay. So if that's the case, no, definitely don't waste your money on that. I think the 2 things that you really should just think about is HDMI to VGA is fairly easy and cheap. And if you need VGA, then that should just be the easiest and most painless way to do it. If you want to do the VGA mod on your official GameCube component cable, I mean, there's so many, this is just an opinion, right? So take it for what it is. But there are so many good choices for GameCubes now. I would almost keep those original D-terminal or component cables as like a collector's item and not even use them anymore. Now, this is just my opinion. I'm not telling you not to use it, but it just seems to me that 5 years ago when I first hacked mine for VGA, there were no other choices. That was really it. You could do a switch between RGB and VGA, and that was the only way you could get that out of a GameCube. And now there's so many choices, and that is not an easy mod to do. You're soldering to a tiny little place. It's a tiny little connector on the end. So I would either, use the official GameCube cables as directed. You can get D-terminal to component converters for pretty cheap. Or I would just keep it on a shelf somewhere as a collector's item. It's probably going to go down from the $300 it's worth now to a more reasonable price, but at least it's something neat and different. And I would just stick with the HDMI to VGA adapter, because it sounds like you already own the Carby. So to spend $10 on that 10 DAC converter, it seems like a pretty decent deal. And it's another one of those things that I do realize money's not growing on trees here, but for $10 to buy that 10 DAC converter, as long as it's not broken, if you go, it's good, but I prefer the other setup, that's a great thing just to have in your toolbox. I've wasted more money on that, on like cables that I couldn't use and stuff. So, I guess my final thought on your setup is don't mod any of the GameCube component or D-terminal cables anymore, just because there's no need to, and you don't want to break something that's definitely a collector's item and worth money. Maybe even consider selling it if you don't love it and don't care about collecting. And I would just try the Carby through the 10 DAC just to see, because it's so cheap. And people have had mixed results with it. I thought it was great, but I didn't spend hours doing deep technical analysis on it. I just plugged it in and made sure I didn't see anything go crazy. So those are the suggestions I guess I would have. The fact that you're using an analog VGA monitor does throw a bit of a wrench into things, because it's not RGB, it's not component, it's not HDMI, but I think you'll be safe with the Carby into the 10 DAC converter. And I'll leave a direct link for that too. Hey, it's if you're in the US, it's from Amazon, so you could always just return it too, I guess. Darkstar7 also chimed in about the using a Y cable for audio conversation from last week. The one thing I maybe forgot to mention is definitely do not do that with video. Don't use Y cables so you could put like both a Nintendo and an Atari and the same composite video input, but only have one on at a time. That still will cause issues. The only things that you can do that with are the HD Retrovision cables, because they have circuitry in there that is very specifically designed for that. But that's the only real devices I know of. So definitely don't do it with video. With audio, I'm sticking to my risk to reward thing. Definitely don't do it with SCART devices, because that's a very, it's a very low tolerance for voltage differences. Don't do it to anything that's super important to you. But I have no problems doing that to this beater monitor next to me. And in fact, it's a big help, because I could, unplug left. All right, I'm still hearing right. Plug that back in. Unplug right. Okay, still hearing left. I could use that for basic testing. So, just don't take a risk on anything that's really important to you, or unless it's something that you could fix or really don't care about. So yeah, I mean, it's a good point, but I think I forgot to mention the video thing from last week, so thanks for bringing it up. I definitely wanted to mention that again. Kyle Gamblin wanted to know what effect the triple bypass for the Genesis consoles have on the Sega CD and 32X in both audio and video terms. So I'm going to start with the 32X, because I've tested that more thoroughly with all the RGB bypasses I've done over the years. And what you get with any video bypass, so whether it's Voltars, arcade TVs, the triple bypass, what you end up getting is a Genesis signal that's at the correct levels for color and crystal clear with no jail bars, as long as you're using the right model, blah, blah, blah. And then you have, because the way the 32X works is it overlays its own image on top of the Genesis image. So you go through that, and then whatever the 32X overlays above it has a little bit of jail bars, and the colors aren't quite as crisp. Now, in my opinion, for the games that I like to play on the 32X, which are not a lot, it doesn't seem to have an effect. Once I get some more testing done, I do want to look into doing stuff on the 32X. Maybe we can just get away with something as simple as lifting the subcarrier on the 32X's chips, so get composite video out of there altogether. Maybe that'll be enough to correct the jail bars part of it. As far as doing anything else, I don't think anybody, at least anybody I've worked with, has looked into a true RGB bypass for the 32X. But, I mean, I'd like to try that just for the hell of it one day, but that is a lot of work for what might be a very small percentage of performance gain. I guess the only way I could determine that is if you pick your favorite 32X games and try it, try it on a stock console, try it on a triple bypassed console, and then see if you could tell the difference and it's important to you. But I, at the very least, will look into stuff like, hey, how do you lift the subcarrier in a 32X? Whatever else I could do to try to figure this out. But yeah, and the only thing too is any bypass you do to a Genesis, you have to remember to make sure that the output is the exact same as a stock Genesis, or it won't work with the 32X. The signal will be way too dark. And for the record, Voltar's board, the triple bypass, both are set up exactly for this. And Alex Arcade TV's board, you can just remove some components and set it back. As far as the Sega CD goes, what I've been able to test so far is that the audio is the same audio increase in quality that you would see on a Genesis game. And that's really as far as I've gotten. I haven't found any negative things about it. I haven't spent that much time with Sega CD and a triple bypass. I'm actually heading to Brooklyn Video Games right after I finish recording this to buy a bunch of stuff. And somebody sent me a Sega CD. Thank you again for that, by the way. But the fix wasn't as easy as I hoped. I thought it was going to possibly be just a fuse, replaced the fuse and it blew out again. I did a full cap replacement and replaced the battery, and now there's different issues. So I'm going to just give that to Cruz. If he could fix it, great. If not, then I'll probably just buy another one from Brooklyn Video Games. Or maybe I'll do both and have a spare, because I'm doing a lot more testing, and I had to get rid of most of my stuff last year, so having something that I use and test at least once a week is probably good to have a spare of. So I'll report more back on the Sega CD, but all I could say is, the only thing I could guarantee you is that so far in the limited testing that I've done, there is zero negative impact on your Sega CD, and the sound quality is a little bit better from what I've heard. So it's a safe thing if you're a huge Sega CD fan. You don't have to walk into this spending all the time on a triple bypass and worrying about it not working or anything like that. Well, that's it for this week. Kind of short, which no problem. Just ask whatever questions you feel like. Some weeks go pretty long, some weeks like this one don't. It's awesome. I'm just really happy I get to participate. I did want to give an update on the Genesis 1 bypasses for anybody interested in the nerdy side of things. If not, you can just close this right now. I won't have anything else after this other than nerd stuff and thank yous. But for people that are interested, the Genesis Model 1s are still having that weird RAM noise issue, and I shockingly found something out. And usually I'm following the lead of some brilliant designers, engineers, and nerds, and I get to figure this one out. But when I was listening to Voltar talk about the analog and digital power rails on the Genesis, I replaced both 7805s with the newer 78S05. That shouldn't make any difference other than if a part was old and starting to fail, maybe now I could just remove that from the equation. And when I moved the power over, what were perceived as the remaining jail bars definitely changed and maybe got a little bit better, but was a very clear change in how they looked. So that pushed Zach to do a lot more digging, and he found on at least the one revision that he had, if you add a capacitor as close to the VDP as possible between power and ground on the analog power supply rail, then it went away for him. But, we don't like to just jump up and down and say it's fixed. We like to test. We've already had one person come back and say they got mixed results. So I'll have a picture up here, and I'll have links to Zach's post if anybody wants to try it. But the prerequisites are you have an already bypassed Genesis, Genesis Model 1 where you can't get rid of the remaining jail bars. If you have Voltar's bypass or the triple bypass, it's probably easier to test with those because we know everything about those. But basically, there are 5 pins. So there's going to be ground, red, green, blue, power. I think it doesn't really matter. For once, it doesn't matter which one's power and ground. You need to take a very specific size surface mount capacitor. You scrape off just a little bit of the solder resist or the solder mask on the motherboard, and then you could solder. You lift the RGB pins up to do the bypass, which you should always, if you want to get 0 jail bars, you should really lift those pins. The only reason you wouldn't want to lift those pins is if for whatever reason you need composite video. Just buy a second Genesis if you need composite video. Anyway, lift RGB, and then between those put this capacitor. And as close to these pins as possible without touching the RGB pins. Then solder your RGB lines to those pins that are lifted. And this will make a lot of sense for people that are watching, people that are listening. I'll just leave the links for anybody. But that should, at least on 1 or 2 models, reduce the noise significantly. Now, Zach and I are testing the exact same way with the same equipment. Just to be sure, I sent him 3 Genesis consoles, the cables I was using, and I think even the power supply. Those will arrive Monday because he lives in the middle of nowhere and can't get faster shipping really for less than $1 zillion. So I'll be able to report back, I guess, Tuesday or Wednesday on his findings. I also want to verify on my setup because I've made the mistake over the years sometimes of saying, yeah, it's fixed. And we only tested like 4 revisions and there's 10 total revisions. I don't want to make that mistake again. That's not fair for people that spend the time and money to do the mods. So I guess maybe by next week's Q&A, definitely not by the weekly podcast, but maybe by the Q&A or maybe by the podcast after that, we should have some more info. So it's looking good, and it's something that I really I want to figure out, and then I want to continue to figure out all the little weirdness things of the Genesis consoles, because even with the Mega SG coming out, even with the analog adapter, I hope they have a better name for that, there's still always going to be a need to play and preserve and get the best out of your original consoles. For me personally, I have the analog stuff set up to my flat screen. And I'll probably use those for streaming, depending on how I could do the output. Maybe I use that through or whatever. But, I always want to have original consoles, and I'm always going to want to have the best I can get out of those. So I do want to keep walking through all the steps of, all right, now that we got all the Genesis models perfect, what about the 32X? Is there anything that needs to be done to the Sega CD? I don't think so, by the way. But, is there anything that needs to be done? And then what's the next console that hasn't been thoroughly tackled yet to get the best out of it? So maybe I'm just weird and picky, but I do very much enjoy doing this stuff, and I want to keep everybody in the loop that's interested. And if you're not interested, it's totally cool. I hope you just turned this off when I warned you to. But as always, thank you to everybody for participating. I love doing the Q&As. I love having the direct inside shot to my amazing Patreon subscribers. For anybody new to these Q&As, please post any questions you have for next week in this week's Q&A page on the Patreon page. So wherever you got this video or wherever you found this audio file, that's where you post the question for next week. Ask anything you want. I try to get to every single one other than the duplicates. I haven't had a time where I've really had to skip anything yet, and I really just, whatever you guys, if there's anything I could do to help, let me know in these Q&As, and I'll do my absolute best. As you heard today, sometimes I don't have the answers, but hopefully I could point you in the right direction of where to find them. And thanks again, and I'll see you next time.